Sister Brenda say they need it whether we enjoyed it or not. Everybody enjoyed it. All right. So now we're going to talk about today the 400-year prophecy. How many of us have heard about that? The 400-year prophecy. What have you heard? Yeah.
Oh, when the Most High was speaking to Abraham about his descendants, said, "No, of surely that your descendants are going to be 400 years in a land that's not theirs, but after the Most High bring them out, they will come out with great substance."
Okay. And what do most people equate that to?
Leaving Egypt.
Leaving Egypt. All right, so today we're going to see if that's true or not. Because one thing about prophecy is specific. And if things are off when it comes to prophecy, you might be off in your conclusion. And this is why it's very important to know who the people are. That's extremely important message because the 85 to 90% of the prophecies that the prophet spoke is concerning the people. Right? And concerning what, young folks? What did we learn about the branch? Who is the branch? Jesse, but who is, he's the root, but who's the branch? David, the Messiah. The Messiah. Messiah is the branch. So it's important to understand, according to prophecy, what the scriptures is talking about. Because according to Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 17 on down, what did the Messiah say? He said, I did not come to do what?
Destroy the law.
To destroy the what? The law or the prophets. But he came to do what? To fulfill them. That means to magnify them, to give them full purpose. So abolish and fulfill is what? Two different things. So the things that the prophets said must be magnified and consummated in the Messiah so we can have opportunity for the promises. That makes sense? All right, so let's go to Genesis chapter 15 and let's look at it. And we're going to see who this relates to. Anybody can start reading when they get it. You can start at verse 1. Because we know that the Most High, he's a Elohim of what? Covenants. So I'm going to see if you notice something. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I can't magnify it because of the recording. So, but just get into Bereshit or Genesis chapter 15, starting at verse 1. Y'all need to cut the fan off, you can. And anybody can start reading that.
After these things, the word of the Most High came unto Abram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abram. I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward."
Boy, that's powerful for the Most High to say, I am your shit. That's a message today. Fear not, Israel, because I'm your what? I am your shield and your what? Exceeding reward.
Exceeding great.
Oh, exceeding great reward. So that's why it's important to put your faith even in what he said to our ancestors, because those same words come down to what? The branches, which is us. So it said, be not dismayed or afraid of what you see, because I am your shield, those that are in covenant with me, and your great reward. Keep reading.
And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir.
Now look at how close the stranger was to Abraham, that he was going to become heir, that he didn't have what? A son in his house. You see that the love that they even had for people that wasn't the natural branches, that he still was possibly was going to have an opportunity to become heir in his house. But the Most High didn't see fit on that. So let's go to the next verse.
And behold, the word of the Most High came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, But he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir.
So he said, wait a minute, this brother over here ain't gonna be heir now. I got to be your heir to come out of your own loins, because you the root. So I can't start with this root and then jump over there and get a whole nother tree and make that the heir. This root tree got to grow and the branches got to spread. That makes sense. Let's keep reading.
And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be.
Mm-hmm.
And he believed in the Most High, and he counted to him for righteousness. And he said unto him, I am the Most High that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it?
So he's saying, Most I hear what you're saying, but how am I going to know that I'm going to inherit these things? Watch what he do. Verse 9.
And he said unto him, Take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon.
So why is he telling them that? Why is he telling them that? Because he's finna do what? He's going to make a covenant with him. So this is going to be a blood covenant that he's going to get ready to make with Abraham. As Abraham asked, how is these things going to be so of what you're saying to me? He said, go get these the pigeons, go get these birds, go get these ox. Because what? I'm finna make one of the most greatest covenants that was known in the ancient Eastern world, a blood covenant, which is said, if I don't perform these things, I myself is a lie and I must die. Remember what we said in blood covenant. When they would split the animal and they would walk in between and they would pronounce the blessings and the curses of their covenant in between those animals. And what would the two people say to each other? If I don't fulfill the parts of the covenant that I say, let what happened to these animals that they were split in half and they died happen to me. So that's how serious a covenant was back then, rather than a contract. Because a covenant, if you break that, it costs you your life. And not only your life, but your descendants' life. That's how serious a blood covenant was. So this is why the Most High can say, okay, I'm going to show you how important this thing is to me. That if this don't happen, you can consider me a lie and no God at all. I would die myself and he can't die. But that's how serious he wanted to show Abraham. Let's keep going.
And he took unto him all these and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another. But the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. All right,
so a deep sleep then fell upon Abram. He got everything that needed to make the covenant, but the Most High let a deep sleep fall upon him because he's going to show him something about his seed. All right, because you notice when the Most High pronounces a blessing over you, it ain't just going to come without sacrifice. And he finna show him what the seed going to. Most High just don't drop no blessings on you just easy. Because he wants you to grow and mature to qualify for this blessing. You might be wanting, let's just throw just a regular blessing in there. You might be wanting a new house. But do you qualify for it? So now I got to take you through processes to get you qualified spiritually and mentally to receive the promises. You see what I'm saying? Because if I just give them to you naturally, you won't value the promise because you got it without sacrifice. Does that make sense? Let's keep going.
And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. What is
seed? What does that mean?
Descendants.
Your descendants, your offspring. Is that spiritual?
No.
So right here it's talking about natural descendants. Let's keep reading.
And they shall afflict them, in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. And they shall afflict them 400 years.
So he said, notice for sure that your descendants, number one, would be in a stranger's land that is not theirs, and would serve them and they would afflict them for how long?
400 years.
So that's some of the things we're going to be looking for. When was they in a strange land that was not theirs? When did they serve and was afflicted for 400 straight years? Let's keep going.
And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterwards shall they come out with great substance.
Mm-hmm.
And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces.
What did it do? Remember, when you're making a blood covenant, the two people would split the animals and do what?
Make a figure eight.
And make a figure eight, pass through it. So the Most High, he did what? He passed through these pieces. Keep reading.
In the same day, the Most High made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates.
So Abraham's land was going to go from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile River, all the way up to the Euphrates. So why do we just deal with that little piece of land called Israel?
It's the chosen spot.
Huh?
It's the chosen spot.
It's the chosen spot.
Yep.
All right. But what did he tell him? He told Abraham, your land was going to be from Egypt, from the rivers of Egypt, all the way up to the Euphrates. So we fighting over one little small spot when his land was supposed to be from the rivers of Egypt all the way to what? Euphrates. It ain't nowhere in the world when all the descendants come back in the land, we're going to be able to fit in that little small land of massive Israel. But we just focus on that part. But this is another reason that every time they got into trouble, what did they flee to? Egypt. Because what? It was already part of their land that was promised to their forefathers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let's keep reading. So, if you can see this on the board here, we're going to break it down. Genesis 15 and 13 says, And he said to Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed, which is natural descendants, shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. So, could we equate this to Egypt? A land that is not theirs, they shall serve them, and they shall be afflicted for 400 years.
Nope.
Why wouldn't we say that Egypt was the strange land?
Because he told them that was going to be part of it.
He told them that was going to be part of it. From what? The Nile, Egypt. Look at all these countries and places, from Egypt to the Sudan, all the way around to Yemen, to Saudi Arabia. That look at the Euphrates rivers encompassing all these places, to Iraq, all the way up to Syria and Turkey. All this landmass here was promised to who? Abraham. So it didn't matter if the Canaanites was in that land. It wasn't their land from the beginning. This is why the Most High can tell them to come and what? Rid them out of that land, because I promised that to you and your descendants. So number one, we see that they are not a stranger to Egypt, because Egypt was supposed, not all of Egypt, because the Nile is going through the middle of Egypt, all the way down here, and it's supposed to be theirs. Does that make sense? All right. And you can get the Genesis 15 and 18. It spells that out for those that want to write that in. Genesis 15 and 18. We'll read some other scriptures that say the same thing. The Lord made a covenant with Abram. To your descendants, I have given you the land from the river of Egypt to the great river and the river of Euphrates. Genesis 17 and 8. The Most High said to Abraham, I will give you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession. Joshua chapter 1, 3 through 4. I have given you this land, just as I promised Moses, from the wilderness of this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river of Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be what? Your territory. So all that over there in the Middle East is what? Ours, according to prophecy. Am I talking crazy?
Nope.
So don't get caught up on that little landmass. Because also, if you search there for the Exodus, you won't find the remnants of the Exodus. It's still a deception in that. We'll get on that another time. All right? So, number one that disqualifies Egypt is that landmass and the serving them for 400 years. So now let's look at that. So Exodus chapter 1, starting at verse 6. Let's see how long they was afflicted. Because we know what happened in the beginning. What? Abraham went, and then what happened? There was a famine in the land, and Joseph went to Egypt. He got sold by his brother, went to Egypt. And then Joseph rose up in power because of the prophecy that he was able to interpret. And Joseph had good graces that he moved his family all the way over to the land of Goshen. They had their own plot of land where they can build and where they can develop and where they can grow. Were they in affliction while Joseph was alive? All right. So let's look at verse 6. Let's look at what happened when Joseph died. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6. Can I get somebody to read that for me?
Back at it. Okay. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. And there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in the mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field.
So when did they start getting afflicted? When a new king came after who died? After Joseph died. And that led us into what? Moses. And Moses grew up in where? In Egypt.
How long were the Israelites in Egypt? In Exodus 12:40 it says, Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. And so because of this, movies like the Ten Commandments will say things like this.
That's a hard dance you do, old man. We've been dancing it for 400 years.
400 years we have waited.
400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
After 400 years of slavery.
And experts on the topic will say things like this.
The Israelites were there 430 years. We have the record in the Bible that tells about the Israelites going into Egypt and living there for 430 years.
But if you do the math, you'll find that this is not mathematically possible. You see, Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt. His father Amram lived to 137. His father Kohath lived to 133. And Kohath was one of the 66 persons who went with Jacob down into Egypt. Now let's just stretch this out as much as we possibly can. Let's assume that Kohath was a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt. Let's assume that Amram was born the year that his father died, and let's assume that Moses was born the year that his father died. So take 133 plus 137 plus 80, and that equals 350, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt could have been no longer than 350 years maximum. Now, more than likely, Kohath was probably not a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt. More than likely, Moses was not born the year that his father died, and more than likely, Amram was not born the year that his father died, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt would have been significantly less than 350 years. So why does Exodus 12:40 say the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The key is found in one of Paul's letters. In Galatians 3:16 and 17, Paul says, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ." Basically, Paul is saying that from the time that Abraham received the promise to the time that Moses received the law, there was 430 years. Well, Abraham received the promise when he entered Canaan when he was 75 years old. Then, 25 years later, when Abraham was 100 years old, that's when Isaac was born. Then, 60 years later, when Isaac was 60 years old, that's when Jacob was born. Then, 130 years later, when Jacob was 130 years old, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So take 25 plus 60 plus 130, and that equals 215, which means that there was 215 years from the time that Abraham entered Canaan to the time that all of Israel arrived in Egypt. Now, Moses received the law the same time that they left Egypt, because remember, the Israelites were living in Goshen, and then Moses led them out of Goshen, brought them through the wilderness, and brought them to the sea. And then God split the waters of the sea in half and brought them into Midian, which is in Arabia, then brought them to Mount Sinai, which is where Moses received the law. And so Moses received the law the same time they left Egypt. So Paul is saying that there was 430 years from this point to this point, and according to the Old Testament, there's 215 years from this point to this point. So take 430 years and then subtract 215 years, and that equals 215, which means that the amount of time that the Israelites were in Egypt was 215 years. 215 in Egypt, 215 in Canaan, 430 total. Now that is mathematically possible, because 215 is significantly less than 350, and that's exactly what the Greek Septuagint says in Exodus 12:40. It says, "And the sojourning of the children of Israel while they sojourn in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan was 430 years. The Samaritan Pentateuch says the same thing. It says, "Now the sojourning of the children of Israel and of their fathers, which they had dwelt in the land of Canaan and in Egypt, was 430 years. Flavius Josephus says they left Egypt 430 years after our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. He's saying they left Egypt 430 years since our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only since Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. So why do modern translations say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The reason why is because modern translations like the New King James, the NIV, the NASB, these are all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic text. But the Hebrew Masoretic text is not the original Hebrew text. The copy of the Masoretic text that most modern translations are translated from is called the Leningrad Codex, which was copied in the 11th century AD. But the Greek Septuagint was translated more than 1,000 years before that in 250 BC, which means that the Greek Septuagint would not have been translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, but rather it would have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew that's no longer around today. The Samaritan Pentateuch also predates the Masoretic text and would also have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew. Flavius Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian. He lived long before the Masoretic text was copied. And Josephus had access to ancient Hebrew texts that have since been lost or destroyed. Paul the Apostle lived long before the Masoretic text was copied, and Paul knew Hebrew. In Acts 26, when Paul talks about his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, he says that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew language, and Paul understood him. Paul knew Hebrew, and so Paul would also have studied from a much older copy of the Hebrew. And what Paul says in Galatians 3:16 and 17 is consistent with the Greek Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the writings of Flavius Josephus. Now the Bible says, "By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word shall be established." Well, we've got more than 2 or 3 witnesses here. We've got 4 witnesses all bearing witness that the original Hebrew text said that the Israelites will be in Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. But more than 1,000 years later, when the Hebrew Masoretic text was copied, the phrase "and Canaan" was dropped out of the text, and all of our Bibles are translated from this corrupted copy of the Hebrew. The New King James, the Old King James, the NIV, the NASB, the ESV. If you go to BibleGateway.com, you'll find there's 50 English translations of the Bible on this website, and every single one of them say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years, which is incorrect and mathematically impossible. Every single one of these translations are inconsistent with the original Hebrew because they're all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, and according to these 4 witnesses, the Masoretic text copied it incorrectly. As a matter of fact, these ages of Moses and his father and grandfather are recorded in the Masoretic text, and yet they only add up to 350 years maximum. So in that sense, there's even a 5th witness. The Masoretic bears witness against itself. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt was only 215 years. But the years of slavery was even less than that, because the Israelites did not become slaves until after Joseph and all that generation died, and then a new king arose who did not know Joseph. Well, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. Then shortly after there were 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. So it would appear that after the 7 years of abundance, Joseph would have been 37 years old. Then 2 years into the famine, when he was 39, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So based on the information given, it appears as if Joseph was 39 years old at the beginning of that 215 years. Then Joseph died at 110. So take 110 and subtract 39, and that equals 71, which means that for 71 years, the Israelites were in Egypt under Joseph's rule, and they were not slaves during those 71 years. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, and that equals 144, which means that the Israelites were not slaves for any longer than 144 years maximum. Now Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt, and they were already in slavery when Moses was born, which means that they could not have been slaves for any less than 80 years minimum. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, subtract the 80 years of Moses' life, and that equals 64, which means that there were 64 years in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. The Israelites became slaves sometime after Joseph died and sometime before Moses was born, sometime within that 64-year time period. Now let's just assume that the Israelites became slaves at exactly the midpoint in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. That would be 32 years after Joseph died and 32 years before Moses was born. If this is the case, then that would mean that the Israelites were slaves for 112 years. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in slavery was probably about 112 years or so. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but definitely no more than a maximum of 144 and definitely no less than 80 years minimum. Whatever the case, the Israelites were definitely not slaves for nearly as long as the movies make it sound when they say,
400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
The Israelites were not slaves for 400 years. They were only slaves for about 112 years or so, plus or minus 32 years. You see, when you take the prophecy in Genesis and you match that up with the timeline in Exodus, then you're able to understand how these puzzle pieces fit together. But the main thing that causes people to misinterpret this prophecy in Genesis is the Hebrew Masoretic text has dropped the phrase "and Canaan" out of the text. This is the main thing that causes people to believe that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years. But the truth is, they were in Egypt for only half that time, for 215 years. According to the documentary Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, the Israelites' arrival in Egypt was around 1665 BC, and the Exodus took place at about 1450 BC. This means that the Israelites were in Egypt for 215 years. This is the only thing that the archaeological evidence supports. The evidence does not support 430 years in Egypt. This is the reason why it's important to understand biblical history correctly first, in order to correctly understand how it correlates with Egyptian history and archaeology.
That's a lot of movies to keep pushing that line, a lot of translations to push that line. So
Exactly. So that's why it's important in your study to you can't be lazy and try to study the Bible because you'll miss some things. So we pretty sure right there, because like we said, prophecy is sure. We found out that that land that they was in Egypt wasn't a strange land because it was promised to who?
It was promised to
To the Israelites. And it said that they would serve and be afflicted at the same time for 400 years. Did that happen? No. Okay. Now let's look at some extra biblical texts that prophesy the same thing. That's why it's important. I when it comes to extra biblical books like other books like Jasher and Jubilees and Enoch and the different testament of Abraham or Apocalypse of Abraham, as they agree with the 66, I go with it. But if it's a contradiction on a certain matter, I stay with what the 66 say. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, so now let's look at the Apocalypse of Abraham. And see what it says. Chapter 32. Therefore, heal Abraham and see. And I admonish you to get the Apocalypse of Abraham, and it opens Abraham's life for us on a whole nother level. You'll see his interaction with his father's house, why he left his father's house, what was going on in the midst of that, how the Most High was calling him on different things like the Apocalypse of Abraham. Chapter 32. Therefore, heal Abraham and see, and behold, your seventh generation shall go with you, and they will go into an alien land, and they will be enslaved and oppressed by them for 1 hour and an impious age. But of that nation whom they shall serve, I'm going to judge. And watch what this says. And the Lord said this too. Have you heard what I said, Abraham? What I told you? What your tribe will encounter when? In the last days. Not 200 and some years later. In the last days. And we're living in what? The last day now. Right. So now we got to take prophecy and see who it relates to. Now, when the Most High said your seed, that doesn't necessarily mean all the seed that came out of you. Exactly. When it says that your seed, because this is the one thing that I looked at with the 400-year prophecy. And I get to that when I get to it. But it said this is what will happen to your tribe in the last days. Let's look at another testament that says the same thing. The Apocryphal, in the Apocryphal, 2nd Esdras, chapter 15, starting at verse 5. 2nd Esdras and the Apocryphal, if you have an Apocryphal, the Apocryphal books was the books that was taken out of the King James Bible. You get the early 1511 King James Bible, you'll see the Apocrypha in there. 14 books that was taken out. Let's look at verse 5. Behold, said the Most High, I will bring plagues upon the world. Now, this is plagues that's going to come upon the world. The sword, famine, death, and destruction. What is this going to happen to? The world. This ain't talking about a specific nation, right?
It's talking about everybody.
Talking about everybody. Verse 6. The wickedness have exceedingly polluted the whole earth. Their hurtful works are fulfilled. Therefore says the Most High, I will hold my tongue no more as touching their wickedness. Now, hasn't it seemed like the Most High been holding his tongue on wickedness that's been going on, in a sense? Because the judgment ain't came expediently. So men's hearts fall to what? The sin. All right? Which they profanely commit. Neither will I suffer them in those days in which they wickedly exercise themselves. Behold, the innocent and the righteous blood cry out unto me, and the souls of the just complain continually. Now, what is he talking about right here? I'm going to read that again. The innocent and the righteous blood crieth out to me, and the souls of the just is continuously complaining to me. What does that mean?
Got innocent people getting oppressed and killed.
But it say they blood cry out. Who blood cried out to the Most High? The dead. Now, who was the first person blood that cried out to the Most High? Abel. When Cain killed who? Abel. Now, think about our ancestors. That they blood is crying out to the Most High. Because they was killed what? Unjustly. justly, what? Righteously. So how much blood is on America's hand? And think about the souls that are continue complaining. When will you avenge us, Most High? Verse 9. And therefore said the Most High, I will surely, he talking to them. I will surely avenge them and receive them unto me all the innocent blood from among them. So the Most High is taking notes of all this destruction that's happening and all the people blood that's crying out, not just in America, but all over the world where people were shipped to. Can you imagine that? But he said, I will receive them unto me, all the innocent blood from among them. Verse 10, behold, my people is led as a flock to the slaughter. Where can we find that at? Yeah, in the New Testament. Letting us know that they was pulling from these books. Because Paul said the same thing in the book of Romans. That we are what? Sheep led to the what? To the slaughter. Where was he pulling that from? Because it wasn't no epistle of Paul when he was saying it.
It's in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
He pulled it from the scriptures.
He pulled it from the scriptures. Yeah. Let you know that this was a part of the scriptures at the time. It was valid because it confirms itself. Right? Double up. I will not suffer them now to dwell in the land of Egypt, but I will bring them out. Now watch what he said. Watch what he said. Pay attention. Now it looked like he talking about he started off talking about he's gonna bring what? Destruction and famine and all that to who?
The whole world.
The whole world. But watch how he flips this. Verse 10, behold, my people is led like a flock to the slaughter. I will not suffer them now to dwell in the land of Egypt. Now he said land of Egypt, but is that necessarily talking about the land mass?
No.
Verse 11 going if the bondage. Verse 11. But I will bring them out with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm. We can see that also in Jeremiah and also in Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And I will smite Egypt with plagues as before. So that lets you know he's talking about a time in what? The last days. Because he said, has he struck any land like he struck Egypt in the first Exodus? Can we look on earth and see that anywhere? But he said, I'm going to strike the world, which is the spiritual house of bondage, just as I did Egypt like before. Verse 11, but I will bring them out with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm and will smite Egypt with plagues as I did before and will destroy the land thereof. So there's another spiritual Egypt that is talking about. And you can look at all our videos and different things like you did that can let you see how America is spiritual Egypt and also the daughter of Babylon. We understand that? So the scriptures is doing what? Confirming themselves. Let's go to Revelation chapter 11 and verse 8. We're going to see how a place can be called spiritual Egypt. Right? I read it. Revelation chapter 11 verse 8. We're talking about the 400-year prophecy. Their bodies will lie in the streets of the great city, spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. So a place can spiritually be called the land of Sodom and what? Egypt. So why would this place be called Sodom? What was known in Sodom?
A lot of corruption.
Sexual immorality.
Sexual immorality. But what is one of the worst covenants that you can break with the Most High when he created you to be a man and a woman and you decide not to be that? Because when he created you, you coming out of a birth covenant womb to be what he created you. So one of the most abominable things you can do to him is say, I'm not going to be that. I'm going to be the opposite. And not only that, but you make ordinances, which is laws, to what? Confirm that type of mindset. You opening up yourself for destruction. Young women, you was born to be a young woman. It's beautiful to be a young lady. Everything about a woman is beautiful.
Right.
Young man, you was born to be man.
Right.
Walk like man, talk like man, act like man.
Right.
You weren't born to flip your wrists. You weren't born to put makeup on, man, all on your lips and eyebrows and all that. You weren't born to do like these rappers do, wearing dresses.
Kurt Franklin.
Kurt Franklin lipstick. Abomination. Yeah. Young Thug putting dresses on, say he shopped in the little kid section of the store. The girl section. Yeah, because they want to take your mind. Now hip hop is trying to turn you into what? A homosexual. All right. So, let's keep reading. So this place would be Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. Now, where can we see that in this land that they crucify the Messiah? He was crucified back then. Yeah. But how do we crucify him now in this land? Blaspheming. What's the form of that?
There is no God.
There's no God.
I am God.
I am God. I am God. What's other blasphemy?
We ain't got to keep the commandments.
We ain't got to keep the commandments.
Go on and on.
Messiah came to what? Do away with the commandments.
Right. You ain't got to do nothing.
You ain't got.
That's what your mama, you can
Go ahead, baby. You crucify him when you do that. When you make him Caesarea Borgia, you crucifying him. Because you making him into an image, a blasphemous image. Not just by how he looked, but what Caesarea Borgia stood for, being a homosexual, an incest person, a person that murdered, that robbed. How you going to make the Messiah that person? That's blasphemy.
I worship in my way.
I worship in my way. Crucifying.
My way to worship is the way he said.
Exactly. So we are crucifying in this land the ordinances that we set up here makes us Sodom, and then the enslavement that we experienced here make us Egypt. Wow. You see what I'm saying? Spiritually. But it said this place would be blasphemous, crucify the Most High, because now you have an attack on the scriptures like you ain't never seen before. Everybody want to come against the scriptures now. And this is why you can't just be at home watching Power all day, Empire all day, and think you're going to be able to stand up for what you believe. You ain't going to be able to do nothing but say what 50 Cent said. Now, I'm not saying nothing wrong if you on your spare time, you watching a little entertainment, but you can't make that 7 days a week. It's all right to look at stuff and laugh and have a good time, but if that's all you feed in your spirit, you will not be prepared when you're challenged. And if you ain't prepared when you challenge, how you are prepared to give your life for what you say you believe? If you can't stand up and defend it now, you ain't ready. So this is why it's important. So now let's look in the scripture and see how this land is blaspheming or that it's crucifying. And we already said the Messiah. Hebrews 6:4. It is impossible for those who have once been enlightened, who have tasted of the heavenly gift, who have shared in the Holy Spirit, who have tasted of the goodness of the word of the Most High and his power of the coming age. Boy, that's something right there. Tasted of the goodness of the word and the power of the coming age. So we can experience what? The power of the coming age now. What is the power of the coming age?
The world to come.
Yeah, the New Jerusalem. The power is what? The kingdom. Because in the kingdom, we won't have no sickness. So what? We can heal people now. Because the kingdom is not without observation. It's where? Within. You see what I'm saying? So the powers of the kingdom to come. This is why the Messiah came healing people and delivering them from demonic spirits. Why? Because he was showing them evidence that the kingdom is near. The same evidence that we should be able to show even now. That makes sense. But he said this person then experienced the word of the Most High, experienced the powers of the age to come, and then have fallen away. It's impossible for them to be restored again to repentance, because they of themselves are what? Crucifying the Son of God over again, subjecting him to an open shame. And this is why I don't run after nobody. If you didn't experience these things and you turn your back on him based off one little thing somebody done told you, that the Messiah never existed, that the Bible is the white man book, that they use this to enslave us. You God, you the I am. Look at the contradictions, and you go based off their word. Don't do your own research. Now you done turned away.
A lot of brothers doing it.
A lot of brothers doing it. Why? Because they're not. Yeah.
Because not everything he's saying, but a lot of brothers said online.
Anybody try to take you out these scriptures, you got to get away from, because there's no other prophetic book out there that prophesies about the future to come. And there's so much information to refute the rebuttals out there. All it takes is some due diligence and study. There's so much stuff about the Messiah walking earth. It's crazy for you to say he ain't never lived. And when somebody say that the Abraham ain't never lived, David ain't never lived, I ain't even got to do archaeological work. I say you here.
That's right.
Prophecy identifies you as the seed. You are evidence that David was alive. You are evidence that Moses was alive. You are evidence that Abraham was alive, because they prophesied your condition. So you gonna look back at the root and say the root ain't real when the root prophesied where you would be and what you would go through? Man. They follow their Egyptology, all that crazy stuff. You know what I'm saying?
The white man gave us about no offense. That's what they like to say.
Yeah. And you can refute that. You can refute that easily.
Yeah, that's what I try to tell them, man.
But you know,
some doctrines I am.
I'm telling you, it is. And you can't help everybody. That's what I learned. You can't help everybody. All right. You just stay where you at then. I'm moving.
Yeah.
Those that got an ear to hear. Let's go to Hebrews 10 and 26. Another way we crucify him. You got markers. You got those that experience his power, that run away from it, that leave him. Hebrews 10 and 26. For if we willfully sin after we receive the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no sacrifice for our sins, but a certain fearful look of judgment and a fiery indignation which shall devour the adversaries. So this is showing you, if you say all the commandments are done away with and willfully start doing against the commandments, it say you crucify him afresh again. And some religions then made a doctrine out of throwing away his laws and his commandments.
Yeah. Strong.
I mean, his whole denomination is based off this. And he's telling you, if you believe this and you walk in this, you crucify me again. Because now what? You willfully sinning and putting it under grace. He said, I don't think I'm going to be waiting on you in verse 27 is a fearful look of judgment and fiery indignations which shall devour your adversary. He that despises Moses' law, watch this. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more sore punishment suppose ye shall be thought of wrath, who have trodden under foot the Son of God, and have counted the blood of the covenant wherewith you was sanctified an unholy thing, and have done despite unto the Spirit of grace. Boy, that's something serious right there. He said you counted the blood of the covenant as nothing, because the blood put you in back alignment, back in the covenant with the Most High, so you can carry out the commandments of the covenant. But when you throw all that away and say that's done away with, that don't mean nothing. Then you frustrate grace then. All right. So we're still on the 400-year prophecy. All right, so watch this. We found out in Genesis 15 and 13, it says, so Abraham, we looked at all the breakdown. It says, so he said unto Abraham, know again that your seed, which is a natural seed, shall be in a strange land. We know Egypt wasn't that strange land, because according to the 15 and 18, that Abraham was promised from the rivers of Egypt all the way to the Euphrates. So that was supposed to be their land. They shall serve them 400 years. We know that they did serve in Egypt for 400 years, right? We found out they might have served maybe 120, 110. We've seen that early in it. Now watch the next thing it says. And also the nation whom they shall serve, I will judge. So what nation of people that have been in constant affliction, not just captivity. Notice they didn't just say captivity, but it said afflicted. They've been serving and been afflicted for almost 400 years. Where can we look on earth to see a people? Transatlantic slave trade. That started in 1619. Or if you want to say 1609, we can do that. But 1619, they say in Virginia. And that's what really capped it off and started it. And all the way up to 2019 would be 400 years. So will we be delivered in 2019? According to prophecy? Hey! We're in a strange land. We've been afflicted. Name a 10 to 15 year period that we wasn't afflicted as a people. We just got done with the civil rights movement. And in 2017, we got to say black lives still matter. Name me. And if you don't believe it, all you got to do is watch our documentary they call Emancipation Proclamation, The Illusion of Freedom. And we show you from 1865 all the way up until today. So will we be delivered in 2019?
He gonna set it off in 2019.
Huh? Yes or no?
I think so.
Some think so. Watch this. Go ahead.
I thought we had to be keeping the statutes.
We got to keep that, because what is that going to do as a nation? The more we get in alignment with the Messiah and then start carrying out the commandment, what is that going to do for us as a nation? It's going to usher what in? The blessing that's going to usher in what? The kingdom. You see what I'm saying? But in 2019, will we be delivered? Read. Y'all scared. Y'all scared.
I think so.
You think so?
I do.
What you think? You think we're going to be delivered in 2019? You going to go again? You going to play it safe? Y'all's willing. Go ahead.
I think key events that's going to put us where we're supposed to be. It's going to start happening.
There you go.
The world is going to start waking up to who the people are. And that's going to start.
You own it. Well, I don't subscribe to saying in the year 2019 is going to be when the second Exodus happens, we're going to be delivered. Because watch what this says. Watch what this says. It says they're going to be afflicted 400 years. Verse 14. And also that nation whom they shall serve, I will judge, and after. And after the what? Judgment. They shall come out with great substance. You can't put a date on that. But we see things are happening now. We see judgment is falling now. But it says after those 400 years, judgment is going to judge that nation. And after it, they're going to come out with what? Great substance. So now let's look at these other scriptures. Because we ain't went through all this not to see their judgment. We ain't went through all this not to look at the judgment. Because did he deliver Egypt before he showed, did he deliver the Israelites before he showed them the judgment of the land that what? Afflicted them. He said, I want to show y'all something before I bring y'all into this promise.
And that's what I'm saying.
Go ahead, brother.
That's what I'm saying. Like, the year 2019, I'm looking at like we're going to be in the land of Goshen. When this stuff start happening, so
those that are in what? Wait a minute. Those that are in what?
in the covenant.
In covenant.
I ain't
Now,
talking
our
about
people still going to be getting somewhat afflicted that's outside of covenant.
right
But those that are in covenant,
Right.
we're going to be like what?
in the land of ghosts.
All right. Watching what?
The rest of the world.
Because we already looking at the judgment now that's happened what? All over the world. I can show you 10 plagues happening all over the world.
Right.
Think about after that eclipse, all this crazy stuff that started happening. All these tsunamis. And look at the path of the tsunamis. That it was coming from West Africa all the way over here. The same pathway we went through. That's what the scripture says right here. Psalms 91 and 7. Psalms 91 and 7. 1,000 may fall at your side, and we're going to see that, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of who? The wicked. Psalms 37 and 10, there will be a day when the wicked shall be burnt up, and they will become as ashes. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall not be. Yea, thou shalt diligently consider his place, and it shall not be. So after the 400 years, if you want to say it's 2019, some people say that it started in, slavery started in 1609, and it started in 2009. It don't matter.
Well, they made it law in 1619.
They made it law.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I kind of go with that too.
Yeah.
So either way, it don't matter because we still going to, after the judgment is when we leave it. So now, let's look at this next thing and we're going to close it up. So does everybody understand this? Is this clear?
Yeah.
It makes sense. Verse 16, let's look at this because we got to look at every specific thing. But in the fourth generation, they should come out hither again. Remember, Abraham said this is going to happen in the last days, according to the Apocalypse of Abraham, chapter 32. It says, but in the fourth generation, they shall come up hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So that's a thing that I had to deal with. So we see that the fourth generation from Abraham, they didn't come out of the land of Egypt, right? So it couldn't have been talking about that. So then what you have to do is look up what generation mean in that scripture. And when you look it up, it's Strong's 1755, and it's the word door, D-O-W-R, and it means period of time. So let's read it in context. But in the fourth period of time, they shall come hither again, and for the iniquity of the Amorites are not yet full. So now let's look and see what that fourth period of time is. Then you have to go to Daniel and look at the statue of Nebuchadnezzar and look at the captivities. Right? The first period of time that it was prophesied was in Babylon. They had the statue of gold. The second period of time was in Persia, the body silver. The third period of time was in the Greek Empire. And the fourth period of time, which is iron, was the Roman Empire. And you got all the way from the iron still come down to iron and lead. So the Roman Empire was not going to end, but it was going to expand. Exactly. Exactly. And this is where you get your Psalms 83, your confederate of nations, that Rome was going to turn into a confederate of nations. That in that fourth period of time. So the little Romes that came after us, this seed was in the European Union, like he was saying, which you get your Portugal, your Spain, everybody that was in the transatlantic slave trade, right? That was the fourth period of time that was going to keep us for 400 years. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Y'all looking like.
So have Rome hasn't finished ruling.
Rome haven't finished ruling.
Rome, they talk about Rome in Revelation.
Exactly. Rome and Babylon really still ruling.
Babylon. Mystery Babylon.
Mystery Babylon.
It is wrong.
Mystery Babylon would be the collection of all these periods. Babylon. That's why you got Babylon. You got Persian thought, Greek thought, and Roman thought, and all. And a circumference and all that. You see what I'm saying? Because even in America, you still got Greek thought. In America, you got Babylonian thought. You got Persian thought and Roman thought. So these areas will be the fourth period of time when we will go into captivity. The same time that the Messiah prophesied in Luke 21 that after all those other periods, another captivity was coming. There was going to be an extension of Rome because he came during the period of what? Rome rule. And he prophesied another captivity. That they would be what? Led into captivity all over the world, and Gentiles shall do what? Trample on Jerusalem. In this fourth period of time is what this was speaking for. That this fourth period of time of the small daughters of Rome, after that 400 period of us, that we would be delivered. And not just us, but all over the world. This is why I say when it said seed, it might not just been talking about all his seed everywhere, but a specific seed that you can see that'll be a catalyst, because we over here as being the children of Israel set the pattern. Really, we have the most influence than any other children of Israel all over the earth. Because what we do, we skillful. Everybody follow us, right or wrong.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So this is why we would be the catalyst of when these things gonna start, if that makes sense. All right, so we'll deal with the last thing and we'll be done for the day.
But Rome isn't ruled. Rome has to rule first.
Yeah, and they've been ruling.
You know, but I know, and they talk about a particular antichrist in the book of Revelation. I know many antichrists come. There's one particular one. Jesus talked about, I think in Matthew 24, he probably went back to Daniel. He said, abomination of desolation. He talked about the little horn. And Daniel then talked about son of perdition, Paul said, let no man deceive you. So that day won't come to the man of perdition that's doing good. He said, see that God holding himself to all his power. And then, a new temple got to be built in Jerusalem. He's going to set in the temple. Like, basically, who doing that no more than anybody? The Pope. He basically, you look up Victor and all that, it basically describes itself as being a look like I'm Jesus in the form of flesh on earth. So, but you got what you call your Protestant churches as well. They basically follow the doctrine of Rome more than the doctrine of God. It's the mother of the harlot.
The mother of the harlot. It's the mother.
Sister churches that basically follow Rome.
Yeah, or the daughter.
So Rome gonna rule big, and I think that's the last kingdom, right? Rome, the Roman kingdom.
Well, you got your extension. You have your extension of Rome now. And then with Rome,
it talk about exactly being wounded by Alexander the Great. One of my son, they got wounded, but their wounds gonna be healed.
Yeah. Well, you got a lot with that that we'll definitely get into another time where we break all those things down. But it's adding on what you're saying. We got a continuation of Rome with all of Rome's daughters that's still ruling also too. All right, you had something you want to add?
I was just gonna say, Daniel tells you that last kingdom is gonna be ruling until Messiah comes back. So it don't matter what face they put on it. We know that it's wrong.
Exactly.
In America, wherever it is, that kingdom is going to be ruling.
It's going to be ruling.
So it is wrong, no matter what you label it, how you label it. It's wrong.
They dangerous too, because when you seen the vision, you fainted, you got sick. It was such a bad.
Well, you look at all what they did though. All what they did in the past.
That's right.
With the blood of the saints in their hands.
And what they doing now with these holidays and how they influence so many people. Rome basically influenced. They said they can see the whole world.
But you gotta look at where Rome got its doctrine from. Rome got its doctrine from Egypt and Babylon.
And Greek mythology.
That's where they got it out. That's why you got Mystery Babylon now. That's going on. But like I said, we'll go into that at another time because that's a whole nother teaching. But it adds to what we were saying. That's what you were just saying. So the last thing, it says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What I do is just sum that up real quick, because what I tried to do is look at who are the Amorites and trace them all the way up until today. Man, Lord, that's extensive. Yes. But then I realized the Most High just showed me. He said, look at what it says. He said, you trying to look at the Amorites. He said, the Amorites ain't what's going to be full, but he said their iniquity. So when you look at the iniquities of the Amorites, you have to go to Leviticus 18 at the things that the Most High told Israel not to do within the land when they got to the land. And you look at what the Hittites and the Jebusites and all those was doing was iniquity and abominations, and a lot of it had to do with homosexuality. A lot of it had to do with incest. A lot of it had to do with pedophilia and sacrificing your children. Those iniquities, and also killing people unjustly, enslaving people. Those iniquities have to be full, and they are filling up quickly. So we know once we see these things happening that to look up. Why? Because our redemption is near. So this just was another teaching to show you about the 400-year prophecy, who it relates to, when it's going to happen. You always hit people with, when they go back to that scripture, when they say, 2019, we coming out. You got to let them know, wait a minute, it says after the judgment. So you can't put a date on that like that. Because you're going to be waiting on 2019. You're going to be like, where's here? We ain't going nowhere. The Bible ain't right. Prophets ain't true then. You see what I'm saying? So all these things have to happen to get them ready for the judgment. And then we'll be delivered. All right? Does that make sense? Any of questions, comments, or concerns? And then we're going to end out. Even online, if you got questions, comments, or concerns.
Yeah, it almost made me want to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
But
not me. I ain't lying.
Almost
man, they did. I can't wait till the Most High comes and bring that judgment. And I ain't talking to the everyday person you work with, but I'm talking about these global rulers of the stuff like they doing.
Ones that I work with, I be looking like, y'all just don't know.
But there's a lot of them gonna get right when they see that judgment come.
I said repent while you can.
Yeah, you better. You better. Cause man, when you see stuff start happening, folks gonna be like, oh, what must I do?
It's gonna be too late then. I'm gonna do that shit no faith to believe me.
Anybody else got any questions, comments, or concerns? Go ahead, sis. We got a question, so y'all let's be able to hear. What you say? The video? Oh, I'm glad you said that because somebody asked me online about the video. All right, that video is called 400-Year Prophecy Fulfilled in Egypt. The one that shows the breakdown of the timeline. Because there wasn't no way that I was going to come in here and try to write all that down. I said, I just let the video do the work. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. But when you go to YouTube, if you want to type in and be able to see the video that I showed, it shows the breakdown of the 400 years and proves that we went in Egypt for 400 years or 430 years. Go to 400-Year Prophecy Fulfilled in Egypt. Find an answer. Watch to the very end. 400-Year Prophecy Fulfilled in Egypt, ? Then it says final answer. Watch to the very end. And the person YouTube channel is called Standing Tall, which is STANDINTALL. Standing Tall. It says, somebody asked, can you highlight the judgment of the Gentiles mentioned in the Apocryphal? And then wait a minute. Almost lost y'all. It says, can you highlight the judgment of the Gentiles mentioned in the Apocalypse of Abraham? What I tell everybody to do, can you highlight the judgment? What I tell everybody to do, what I do on some of those questions there, what we'll do, because that'll turn into a whole nother teaching. We'll look at that, and I'll come in on a side separate time, and we'll highlight those judgments that's going to be on the Gentile. That's why it's important to look in some of the Apocryphal books and some of the other books to give you a clearer understanding. Sister Linda K. Carver says, will our people also die in judgment if they don't wake up? Yes. If our people don't wake up and repent, they will die. Just like what happened in what? In the first Exodus. When our people, now some of them gonna run out at the skin of their teeth. They're gonna come out, they're gonna get scared when the Most High be delivering. They're gonna be running and coming with us. But there's another judgment got to happen in the wilderness. When the Messiah say, I'm going to purge out the rebels. Some of y'all going to be over there under the tree eating swine flesh and mouse.
And the abomination.
They going to see a dog on hog and going to try to kill him and cook him. and gonna die.
That'll be your last meal.
According to prophecy. It's a goat from the sheep. So if you don't wake up, that you ain't coming. Some are gonna be like Lot wife, get killed on the way because they're gonna be looking back. All these type of things that happen, and some ain't gonna never make it out.
Make it all the way to the wilderness, and then you get destroyed for some pork ribs.
So no, if our people don't wake up, if we don't wake up and repent and come back to the covenant, we pretty much need to sign our death certificate. And that's what's going to happen. And that's why the Most High said, I come to do what? Bring a sword. So you ain't going to be trying to go run and get your cousin and say, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Go get your nieces and nephew. If they don't want to come, I'm not finna struggle and try to drag you. Like black folks did back in the day. When we all was walking in the street and one of us took off running, ain't nobody asked no questions. Everybody took off running. And we found out why we was running later. So run first. Survive again. All right, so that's pretty much it. That look like all the questions online. All right, that's pretty much it. We're gonna get ready to close out now. Our announcements. Let me call this off.